welcome, Dr. Jen Castellanos-Bonow, for sharing your wisdom. It's been, last time we sat on my back porch during COVID. Now it's a little too chilly. And luckily, technology has caught up.
So we don't have to scream at the computer so they can hear us.
We were doing some yelling with my husband Ethan in the background being like, louder.
Yes.
And we can be safe. And Zoom has given us nice little features at the bottom to be like, hey, you want to connect to Facebook? You want to do live? Here, we're going to do this, make this easy for you.
Great.
Yeah.
All right.
So you and Shane Isley, who works for the Performance Thinking Network, you guys have written a fabulous blog. And I think part 2 has, we're going to bring you on and we're going to talk about another blog, but you guys just released a new blog. But we're talking about an older one that was released about a little over a month ago.
I think it was like December, actually.
Oh, was it that long ago?
I know.
Oh, yeah. This new year has been hard.
Pandemic brain.
Yeah, for sure. And you guys were talking about setting rates for also different service lines, which I want to talk about both of those things because they're kind of important. So what do you mean when you're saying like pricing our services? What are our services?
Yeah, that's actually the first question you have to answer when you start considering this. And I think that it can be an interesting question to answer because in some ways our services or what our services are seem to be dictated to us, right, by a set of CPT codes. But from my perspective, or Shane's perspective, I shouldn't leave him out of this, we need to sort of define our services more broadly than that, and kind of think about them as though we weren't first think about them outside of this sort of environment of the medical model and just think, okay, what are we providing and who is providing those services? So often in organizations, you have multiple levels of providers, and each of those providers is actually delivering a different service than the other providers are. So our behavior technicians deliver one type of service, and that's the direct intervention, whereas our BCBAs might be providing or delivering a much wider variety of services that includes parent training or consultation. They're providing support to the treatment team. They're developing treatment plans and ensuring that child's making progress. And then beyond that, you might be doing something like group intervention, and that could be family group intervention or just for children. Your company might provide consultation to schools or to other after school programs, things like that. And so it's really important to define what those services are, what's included in all of those services, and who's delivering those services, just to start with. And I really think it's very important that you don't just define your services based on what the AMA or insurance companies say our services are.
All right.
Does that make sense?
Awesome. Yeah, no. And I think that last point is a really good one to let everyone know, is that like you are the master of that definition, not necessarily the insurance company that you may be contracted with or the school that you're working with. Like you're the one who presents that definition. And all that stuff, because
right.
you're the one,
and they decide what they'll pay for inside of that, or how they'll pay for it. Exactly.
You know what the boundaries are that you can provide, given your staff and your competency, and what you're willing to do.
Absolutely.
So why do we need to make such a fuss around these definitions and doing all of this planning at the forefront?
Well, so what I've seen just over and over and over again when I work with different companies, and inside of the companies that I have worked with, is that we tend to be told what somebody will pay for our services. So an insurance company, for instance, inside of our contract. And then we decide, okay, that's the price for the service. And that's really problematic for a number of reasons. But first and foremost, if we're not figuring out what our services are and how much it costs us to deliver those services before we establish pricing, we're creating a situation that's often untenable for a company. You can't remain in business if you can't keep your doors open. And in order to keep your doors open, you need to know how much revenue you need to generate. And in order to know how much revenue you need to generate, you need to understand your costs and your desired profit margin. So it's sort of a working backward from like, we want to keep these doors open to what do we need to do to make that happen? That's just basic like business sense, right? So in addition to that, when we just sort of agree to what an insurance company is going to pay us without understanding whether or not it fits within our pricing model and it's something that we can afford, we do ourselves and the industry a huge disservice. We're often told when trying to engage in contracts with insurance companies, well, that's what the other providers in this area accept, or that seems to be the standard pricing in this area. And really, it's not standard pricing. It's just what they've dictated and people have accepted because they haven't done the work to kind of figure out what they need to do and then done that work of negotiating or choosing to remain out of network. And so there's kind of two pieces there. That's just like your own little world of your business and then the broader industry as a whole inside of your community, your state, and so on.
That's such a really important point. When we were starting off our business, just a little side note for those people, our history, Jen and I worked together and are co-partners of a behavioral services agency. Before Jen joined the team, I was talking and creating negotiations with a insurance company, and they only had a few contracts in the area, and lovely lady that she just started this job. She was a former surgeon, and this was her retirement job. And she gave me this contract, and she was like, "Here you go." And it was based on like OT and SLP type of model where it was like a visit per day. Mm-hmm. And I was like, hey, so if we accepted these rates, it would be like $3 an hour, Right. And we sat down and we had a conversation and explained everything, what, like how we ran what the model was like and what ABA is like, and how we're kind of like in that umbrella with, the people that we work
Allied
with.
Health.
Right, exactly. Yeah. But at the same time, totally different, codes and yada, yada, yada. And she goes, I pulled this contract because another agency down the road accepted it.
Yeah.
And
it's mind blowing, right? You're like, how can they afford that?
Exactly.
I think that you brought up a really good point in that too. And that when, we're very in the numbers, right? I can tell you almost on a moment to moment basis what our numbers look like inside of our company, because it's that important, right? Especially this pandemic year, right. We have to know what's going on. And when you're that knowledgeable about your company and what your company's needs are from a cost and revenue generation perspective, and how those costs translate into quality care for your clients, when you have all that knowledge and you can bring it to somebody like her, you have an opportunity to also educate and help people understand what this actually is, rather than sort of assuming that they know what it is. Like you said, they kind of base their prices on a completely different service model, a completely different type of service. And then we're like, oh, well, other people took it and couldn't, and then it's hard for them to understand why you're saying no. And being able to have that conversation in a knowledgeable way that's respectful of the goals of the the funder, whoever it is, and the goals of your organization, and keeps that member in the center, right? Like, we're trying to provide high quality care to members. You have a lot of opportunities, but you have to know what it is that you're trying to achieve across the service itself, the quality of the services and what those services entail, and what you need to earn in order to be able to make that happen.
Right. And side story, that lady who was the contract negotiator turned out to love us so much that she would personally refer clients to us, knowing that we delivered such good service because we put the client first.
Well, and she changed companies and then like gave me a call and said, hey, would you be interested in this one? And finished the sentence with, you probably won't, because these are the rates and I can't change them. And so she knew, right? Like and she respected that, like, you know, and understood that we weren't just being like stubborn. We had a rationale behind what we were asking for.
And speaking of knowing your numbers and knowing what leads to those numbers, then, you know, you mentioned the blog that there's a formula, right? Mm-hmm. So it's the sum of the cost and the profit margin divided by the total service hours that gives you the hourly rate of how, and it's just easy to talk about things as an hourly rate, even though that's not how we, right.
It gives you something to be able to work with. Yeah,
right,
absolutely.
Right. So while that formula is just like really easy, right? If you know algebra, like if you went to even like, you know, 7th grade math.
Yeah, right? I was gonna say my 5th grader could do that. Yeah, so.
And you can like bust that out, but it doesn't seem like it really is that easy.
Yeah, so it is deceptively simple. So when you're thinking about costs, there's what I find is easiest and is pretty standard in like business, accounting, financial kind of language, is talking about your fixed costs and your variable costs, and getting a handle on those. And your fixed costs are easy to figure out because they're fixed. So it's your rent, it's your your monthly subscription to QuickBooks. It's your like sort of those things that stay the same every single month. It's your per employee cost for your practice management software, things like that. They don't change, right? Something that's a per employee cost may change based on the number of employees you have, but that's also easy to figure out. Your variable costs are a lot more challenging. So you kind of have to gather some data and then average those out the best you can to whatever level you're looking at. So like monthly is usually pretty good. So looking at like, okay, on average, our utility bill is X amount of dollars per month. On average, our, for the last 2 years, our liability insurance cost X, which, averages out to this, or we can kind of start to calculate, like, I can anticipate it's going to be this much more and kind of figure that out. So that is actually a really hard part for me because I'm a behavior analyst and I like my data to be accurate. And your variable costs, yes, your variable costs are never going to be precisely accurate as you're projecting. They're only accurate in retrospect. So you've got to kind of figure those two things out. And then as you do that, you can then start to whittle it down toward what your total monthly cost is, predict how many hours of whatever service you're going to deliver per month, and start to work it out that way. You also kind of have to think about your employee costs, and it's likely that your BCBA employee costs are going to be different than your behavior technician employee costs. And then you're going to have just overhead employees, right? Like the employees who are not generating revenue, but you also have to calculate into those costs. They are usually a fixed expense if they're a salary, or a variable expense if they're hourly. So yeah, there's definitely some additional math behind that kind of simple equation that has to happen so that you can get there. And you have to get those data, and you have to, be in your budget and be in your accounting and kind of really know. It's a great, like, your accountant can be really helpful to you with figuring out this part. That's what they do. from,
Right.
their job. They like this. So if you don't like this, they do, and they'll help you.
And so like, how often do you interact with your accountant to like, is it just like meeting with them to set this up, or do you have like ongoing consultation, meeting with them when these things arise?
Yeah, so I think that that's just going to be based on the individual, right? So in my case, like I have pretty regular contact with our accounting firm because they also do our bookkeeping for us. And the bookkeeping is an important part of this because you want to make sure that you're matching, right? Your projections are matching, or you can adjust if they're not. Um, but once this is kind of set up, if you're comfortable adjusting, if you kind of really understand what's happening in the math, right? Like where these numbers are coming from and how they get there, then you can just continue forward with it and adjust as needed. If not, like do set up that regular opportunity to meet and learn, and that investment that you make, like that cost of that financial professional. So an accountant or a financial advisor could also do this. Like that cost is going to come back in a return of meeting your profit margins and your financial goals for your organization. And you can fade that out as you gain the education you need to keep it going on your own.
Yeah, there's one thing that, when you look at the blogs that are, or the Facebook groups that are specifically catered to ABA and running a business, such as ABA business builders and stuff, and you ask people about, I want to start up and run my own business. Everyone's saying, get a professional.
Yeah,
like
absolutely.
You are a clinician, and that is your training. You weren't trained in business. You aren't an accountant or a financial officer of some kind. Like they went to school for a reason.
Mm-hmm.
And it's and you should, if you are running a business and this is something that you did, and like you get savvy and proficient at it and you learn, but it's also like, there's other people out there who have that specialization and that degree for a reason.
And will help you avoid mistakes in the beginning as you're building that knowledge for yourself. Absolutely. Like that's, I think it's so interesting because so many people do just like go start a business outside of our field, right? It's like, I have a cousin who like just started this like women's clothing boutique, and it's successful and amazing. And she didn't go to business school, but she's like doing it because she's selling a tangible product.
Yeah.
We, in addition to not necessarily getting a lot of business training in our education to become behavior analysts, some of us do, right? Like there are people who are like very focused in OBM and business and take on that extra learning. Or we got a little touch of it at UNR because of the self-capitalized model. But most of us don't get that. And so, but in addition to like kind of having to figure out how to run a business, like we're not selling a product, we're selling a medical service inside of a very specific model. And there are not a lot of industries whose ability to generate revenue is constrained by a third party. Mm-hmm. So understanding that and understanding what those variables are, like you're only going to be able to get so far in a contract with an insurance company, and it's never going to be exactly what you want it to be. And there aren't a lot of places where it's like, there aren't a lot of other industries where you can say, well, this is what I charge, but they're only going to pay me this much, so I'm going to do it anyway. Like that's not, I mean, there's obviously like market, factors and things like that. But so, it's so much to learn. Like it's more than just simple, like it costs me $10 to get this shirt into the store, so I need to charge $13 to get it out, right? Like it's not that simple. There's a whole model that we're inside of that has all these influences that are just outside of our control. Right. And if you don't understand them, you're going to shoot yourself in the foot.
Right. Whereas like if we want to compare it to the the shirt, right? Mm-hmm. Like when we did our presentation for Medicaid, right? We say, mm-hmm. Okay, if this was a shirt, it costs us $13 and you guys are paying us $10.
Right. And then,
but
and
there's
like,
nothing we can do with that unless we
right.
use legislation.
Yes. Which is a whole other thing, right? Like if you want to, so, like one of the things we talk about is that, I'm not doing this because I want a mansion and a
No,
Ferrari. Like I'm
no.
doing this because
Wrong
I
industry.
love this, right? Like I love the science and I love how it can help people. And I love that kids can have transformation and a little change in their life that allows them to have a higher quality of life. And I can't have a bleeding heart, because if I have a bleeding heart, it's going to bleed, my company will bleed out, right? And so, if that's something you have to take into consideration, right? Like inside of our company, it's important to us that we are able to serve kids and families who do have Medicaid benefits. And so we have to calculate that into our cost. Like the loss that comes with that has to be calculated into our costs so that we can know what we need to charge in other places.
Well, and I'm glad that you brought that up. Thank you, because that's the biggest thing. And I know that was like the hardest thing with you and me, because here I am, the walking bleeding heart.
Right.
And you're like, so Kerri, so we need a
paycheck.
To make payroll. But and with us setting these set rates and then finding other ways then to adjust, right? So we want to meet our values, right?
Yeah.
And not just and that's the reason, one of the reason that someone shifted, or not someone, that we shifted to the medical model, right? So that we're not just servicing rich families, right?
Right. Yeah.
Because it's an expensive service just because of the amount of hours that are needed and so on and so forth. But we want to service those who can afford it, and or the gap that we have in our state for those who maybe don't qualify for Medicaid, but also can't afford the private insurance. It's just like, okay, so how do we meet this, but also keep our business afloat? Because if the business goes under, then you're servicing nobody. Nobody has a job, and you're not meeting you're not doing anything of your mission or vision, right?
Absolutely. And that's, and I think that's where like this idea that we take when we're treatment planning, for instance. So, we begin with the end in mind, right? Like who Stephen Covey maybe says that, somebody. And the end is like something you're never going to achieve, right? Like you don't achieve values, you live values. But knowing what those are, knowing who you're trying to serve, knowing like those values as far as like, there are companies that take the approach that the more people they can serve, even if it's not necessarily the most high quality or the most comprehensive intervention, just the more kids that are getting services, the better. And that is absolutely a valid business model, right? And so that value is serve as many people as possible. So then you have to move backwards to figure out, okay, how do we price that service to be able to achieve that? Or if the value is fewer kids, but really intensive, family centered, et cetera, like we're going to just, then that's, again, very valid, but you've got to figure out what you need to generate in order to achieve that. Because the most important is doors open. So otherwise there's nothing else.
Right. So, so in your blog, you mentioned a few things on like how you can bring in money that can like also meet your values. I think you were mentioning like, okay, so if we're setting our prices here and we have these values, we can maybe provide some scholarships. You can invest in benefits for your employees, strengthen up that culture. That's one thing that we notice in, which I think hopefully it seems like people are doing a better job tending to your own garden, it's just taking care of employees and not being an RBT and being a BCBA and just focusing on like, okay, you need 40 billable hours and, everyone's driving, 50 miles outside of their radius. Like, it seems like people are shifting away from that model.
Yeah.
Hopefully. But it seems as if like there's stuff that you can do. If like, okay, so if these are your set rates and you are generating some nice revenue, you can take that money and it's not saying like it's going to your boat, but it's going to like good things that are matching your values.
Yeah, absolutely. So like a business has to generate a profit in order to stay open. Like that's just a fact. But this word profit, I feel like is just kind of icky for us for whatever reason. I don't think it should be. It's not a bad word, and there's nothing wrong with making money. And in fact, the fact that we generated a profit is what allowed us to remain open this past year during this pandemic, right? Like we had a cushion, which is the first thing that you need to establish, right? Like once you're going and you're bringing in revenue that exceeds your costs, you put that money away. And then once you have enough money that's going to get you through a tough spot, then if the values of your business or your personal values aren't about the boat and the Ferrari and whatever else, and if they are, that is also absolutely okay. That's not a bad thing. But if they aren't, then yeah, look at ways that you can enhance quality of service. For instance, there's not really, once you've sort of hit a baseline level of quality, there's not in our industry sort of a big return on investment in further quality. So that's a values-based investment, right? Look at your workplace and how your employees are doing in places where you can improve for them. Do you have a high turnover rate? What can you build in now that you have some extra funds available to make their job better, right? Can you give them raises? Can you offer more time off? Can you give them their own devices so they don't have to share anymore? Like there's all sorts of things, they'll tell you what they want.
Right.
So there's all sorts of ways that you're just investing that back into your company, which is enhancing your ability to meet those values of your company, and to get to those, like we shouldn't forget like business results and KPIs, like to make sure you're meeting all of those other places. So maybe your profits are looking good, but your, like I said, service quality isn't, or employee engagement isn't, or customer satisfaction isn't. You have what you need to now start to address those things. Maybe you hire somebody who's an overhead cost, but whose job is quality control, things like that.
Perfect. Awesome. Well, thanks so much. I was unsuccessful at trying to figure out where I could find questions. So hopefully it says watch live video, but now all I do, everyone says I found it, but everyone just says, I hear you. And see, now I just hear myself. So everyone just says, I hear you and you're live.
So we got the audio.
I don't think that we got questions. So,
okay.
But hopefully this was informative for people. Yeah. And thank you so much, Dr. Jen, for joining me today.
Thanks for having me. I like doing this.
Yeah. And I think, with you and Shane writing these blogs, our plan is to have you back and to chat about them and provide some opportunities. And hopefully with us doing this regularly, hopefully we gather some interest and some questions, and stimulate some conversation.
Yeah, absolutely.
Great. Well, thanks so much. Have a great rest of your day and almost weekend. And I'll see you around. Take care.
Okay.
Bye.